aflevering 32 van de Upperlot podcast. Mijn naam is Dennis van Oostzaanen.
En mijn naam is Nicky Steenkist. En vandaag spreken wij met voormalig Imagineer en Twitterheld Jim Shull. Hey Dennis.
Hey Nicky.
Nou, het staat al in de titel en we hebben het al in de intro benoemd.
Het staat al in de intro. We hebben vandaag een hele speciale gast. Dus we gaan wel overschakelen op het Engels.
Ja, want we kijken uit naar dit interview. Hè?
Ja,
we zijn heel benieuwd wat hier allemaal te stellen
Ik heb hier heel erg veel zin in.
We gaan hem nu even aankondigen in het Engels. Dus hier is het interview met Jim Shull.
So today we have a very special guest on our podcast. He was an Imagineer for 33 years and he designed theme park shows and attractions for multiple Disney theme parks in Europe, China, California and Florida. He's one of the most active Imagineers on Twitter, but what's his relationship with Universal? Ladies and gentlemen, and without further ado, I would like to present you Mr. Jim Shull. Jim,
hey
welcome.
guys, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. This is an opportunity to talk some more fans about Disney, Universal, and all things theme parks.
Yeah,
so thank you.
It's a pleasure for having you in our show. Just to start off, we're going to ask this to all the guests we have in our show. What do you remember about your first time you walked into a Universal theme park?
Oh, the very first thing. Well, Universal Studios Hollywood is actually my local theme park. It's probably about 35 minutes from my home by car. And I remember going there as a young child with my family because, again, it was a studio theme park. Back then, when dinosaurs walked the earth, they didn't have many rides. It was really a theme park studio tour. And I was just blown away because they had explanations of how they made movies, and you could see actors, you could see movie sets, television sets. It was a truly large, real, active studio, which was unique because the other studios in Southern California, such as Warner's, Disney, Paramount, you really could not go onto the set or onto the studio lot. But Universal is unique in that way. So it was a very special memory.
Yeah, because you started off with your career, if you go back in time to 1978, you started at Marvel Studios. What did you do over there?
Well, actually, before theme parks, although I was always interested in theme parks, before theme parks, I was an animator. And I did animation for feature-length animated films, such as Transformers and G.I. Joe. I did a lot of work for different animation studios for television, such as Hasbro, Marvel Studios, Filmation, Hanna-Barbera, Ruby Spears, Deke, and countless others.
Yeah, because I looked up on your profile on IMDb and also saw Ghostbusters, which is
He-Man.
He-Man. Ghostbusters, one of the franchises which ended up also having a show at Universal, always being linked with the Universal theme parks. So that's very interesting. But then you started at Marvel Studios. Was it at the comic side of Marvel or the animation side of Marvel?
A little of both, actually, because I've always wanted to draw comic books. I didn't have much success at that, but I had more success in the studio side. So Marvel Productions was located here in the San Fernando Valley in California next to the airport. And they had the contract to do all the Marvel television shows that you would see. And they had countless shows, and I went and worked in animation and then graduated doing pre-production design and then storyboard, and finally I was an animation director doing storyboards.
And after that career, how did you pass on into the theme park industry?
Well, like a lot of things, I grew up with, friends who were fans of popular culture, such as comic books, theme parks, movies, television programs. And so over the years, over the decades, people would go and get jobs in other locations. And so one day, I got a phone call from a very good friend who I've known for several decades. And he said, could you come to a restaurant, let's have lunch. And when we were at lunch, he said, WDI, Disney Imagineering, was looking for new show designers to come and help them out on different projects. Would you be interested? Having been a fan of Disney and all things theme parks, I, bolted out of my seat figuratively and booked a interview, and then another interview after that, and then another interview after that, finally ending with an interview with Bob Weiss, who then was the head of the MGM Studios theme park which was in final development and under construction in Florida. And he offered me a job as a show designer. And one thing led to another. And, I thought, well, I'll probably be here for a few years. And a few years turned into a couple of decades. And finally, after 33 years, I retired from the company.
That's a very interesting project, MGM Studios. Also very interesting history with the Universal Studios theme park and the MGM Studios. If I look at your theme park bio, I mean, it's so long. You've done so many projects that I don't even know where to start. Could you tell us a little bit about the work you've done for Walt Disney Imagineering, the projects you were involved in?
Well, I started working originally for Disney Imagineering. My very first project was one in Florida at Epcot, Goofy About Health, which is a very small show. And it was a small show for a reason. When you start at WDI, they don't want to trust you with all of the toys. They give you a few toys to play with to see how well you do. And so Goofy About Health was a very small show, but a very good show and important to me. And I did it. And people thought, well, you're pretty good. So they gave me another project, which was a little larger, which is a land in Anaheim called Mickey's Toontown, which was later copied in Tokyo Disneyland. And I finished that and then thought, well, gee, this is probably like animation. I'll be on the street now because I've got no work. And literally the next day, Tony Baxter came to my office and said, I understand you're available. How would you like to work in Paris? And so again, I figuratively bolted out of my seat and said, where do I sign up? And so for the next 5 years, I worked on the additional capacity program at Disneyland Paris, which consisted of 5 rides. 4 of them were built, 1 of them was not. But I worked on 4 new rides for Disneyland Paris because remember, when it opened, it was extremely popular and they just did not have enough for guests to do. So the answer to that was for me to work, and I spent the next 5 years in France off and on working on these 4 projects.
Yeah, because if you look at Paris, you're also been well known for the design of the Rock and Roller Coaster you did in Florida, but also the Paris version. And there's a funny story about the connection between a coat hanger and a rock and roller coaster. Can you explain it?
Oh, yeah. Well, people who know me know I wear glasses. And one thing that bugs me about roller coasters are anyone who says, well, you have to take your glasses off. So I started with a ride engineer. And the two of us took literally coat hangers to bend it into the track geometry that we thought would be fun. And then he was my sanity who would look at the wire geometries and say, yeah, you can wear your glasses. It's not going to be too rough. It's not going to be too violent. It'll be fun, but smooth. And once we had that, we literally took the wire coat hanger and took it to meetings and said, we want something like this. And of course, there's a lot of reality that goes into it and a lot of, countless hours of expert technical opinions from ride engineers, both inside Disney and finally Vekoma Country Company there in Flowdrop. They're the ones who built the original rock and roller coaster and the one in Paris. So worked a lot with them living in Flowdrop and a lot of visitation to them in Flowdrop.
It's funny to see how all these things are coming together in a small Dutch village in the southern part of the country.
Yeah, it's amazing. I'll tell you just a little sidebar story in Vekoma they are craftsmen there in Flowdrop. And so when you step onto the factory floor, they'll have the entire floor, which is consisted of a brick floor. And when they go to do the bends on the track, they will take plumb bobs, string with a weight, and that will, of course, be vertical to the ground because of gravity. And then they mark the bricks with chalk, and then they lay the bent steel across the chalk, and then they take it to their machine to run it through to do a turn. And then they go back to the same chalk floor, take new measurements, then put it back in the machine to get the second turn to give you, at the end of the process, a compound curved track that then you can take to the field to install.
I've seen the way they do it on several documentaries. One thing I'm curious about, because if I look at the projects you've done for WDI, a lot of these projects involve movie-style theme parks, just like Universal is, like MGM Studios or Hollywood Studios nowadays, but also Walt Disney Studios Park. Is there something different in designing a movie-style theme park compared to a regular theme park?
You know, that's an excellent question. My belief is always that, well, I'll back up. There's been an evolution of thinking about movie theme parks over the decades. Originally, people thought and planned for a design in a theme park based on a movie studio that would allow guests to come and find out how movies are made. Now, today, we've drawn or moved away from that because now the thinking is, well, if you want to know how movies are made, you have access to DVDs with making of videos. You can go to YouTube, you can go to Revit, you can go to other social media sources to find out how that's done. So the focus now starts to become more about how movies not are made, but how you as a guest can ride the movies, stealing shamelessly from the classic Universal Steven Spielberg quote.
See the stars ride the movies, yeah.
Yeah, see the stars ride the movies. So we really don't talk about how movies are made. Now, I happen to believe that the environments where movies are made still hold resonance to guests because old movie lots are historic. They are interesting. They are kinetic. They are ever changing. And that's an interesting location. If you go to old Hollywood, whether you see it at Universal or at Disney in Florida, old Hollywood, you and I can never visit that because it's been bulldozed, it's been demoed, but it can exist in a theme park. And again, it's interesting the way that, I don't know, Main Street USA at Disneyland is interesting because I can't go back 100 years in time, but I can go to representation at a theme park. And so that has value to guests, in my opinion.
It transports you to a time and place that once was, and you can relive that again. I think that's the same appeal that, for instance, Frontierland has, especially for us Europeans, to be transported into an era we don't know, but we've seen so many things about.
Well, and that's an interesting point you make because Frontierland, in my opinion, in Disneyland Paris is the finest of the Frontierlands. And for whatever reason, Europeans really love that era because it's not a place you can go to. Again, another funny Vekoma story. Vekoma would come out to California, Glendale. And if you know Glendale, it's in Southern California. And inevitably, on Friday afternoon, the team would say on their first weekend in California, hey, we want to go someplace. Great, I would say. And they'd say, well, we want to go to the Grand Canyon because we've heard about the Grand Canyon. It's fabulous. Can we go there? Yes, you can, but it's a 12-hour drive.
Yeah, it's quite far away.
So, I mean, it's the European, attitude of, well, it must be close because, everything in Europe is close. Therefore, everything in America must be close. And you find out, no, not the case. But Europeans seem to love the classic American West because it's very different from what you find in Europe. In the same way that Americans shamelessly, go to Europe and they do the checklist. They go to Paris, they go to Amsterdam, they go to London, because we don't in America have anything like that. When you go and go someplace unique, you want to see unique things.
Yeah, if we go back to the time you started for MGM Studios development in Florida, what was at that time the battle between Universal and Disney? How did you
experience that from the mouse point of view?
Well, I guess I was in a bubble because I really didn't experience anything. I found out there was conflict or controversy, a decade later. I know you probably know more than I know about that.
Well, we know you from Twitter. You're very famous Imagineer on Twitter. You share so many stories, but also so many pictures from the opening days of Universal Studios in Florida.
So you must have been there to compare the park you've been working on and the park the neighbors were working on.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I was a fan of theme parks before I became a designer for theme parks. And so I would go to Universal the moment probably even before they opened, Because remember, I was living in Florida or traveling to Florida for my Disney projects. So I would drive through and they had opened the parking lot and you could drive right up to the front gate, even though the park had not yet been opened. And the Psycho House was one of the first things built on a bluff over the parking lot that could be seen from the street as a way of marketing. And so I would go by just to see what was going on, take photographs. And then when they opened the park, of course, I went there. And I remember going there and walking through the park, and the park employees apologized because, as you've read, so many of the rides were either not operational or very, very semi-functional.
Yeah, we talked about that a lot in our show, about several rides. We talked about Confrontation, we talked about Jaws, and several other rides. So yeah, we know that the park had a very problematic start. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went there, and it was. I had a great time. I mean, it was a new park. It had all the problems of a new park, but what I saw it, I loved. And at the end of the day, as you exit, they handed me a free "Please come back" ticket. Which I used it and came back and continued to enjoy that studio park very much.
If we look at what we said earlier, and at this moment, the movie-style theme parks are all about see the stars, ride the movies. Do you think that Universal Studios Florida was ahead of its time? Because a lot of the rides, like Earthquake, Confrontation, Jaws, were basically where you could ride the movies. You were not shown a backstage tour or something. You were really inside of the action.
Let me back up. I think that one thing that Universal did was they took a movie property and they made it clear to guests that they were about to experience in ride form the movie property. Now, Disney did that in 1959 because most guests don't know the Matterhorn was based on a movie called Three Men on a Mountain. It was a movie before it was a theme park ride. But the difference is in Disneyland, they had the major set piece from the movie, which is the Matterhorn, there in the park. But they didn't say, oh, by the way, this is a studio backlot where we have the Matterhorn that now you get to ride on, and it's now you get to ride in the movies. Disney didn't do that because, Disneyland, California, is a fantasy environment. So you enter into the fantasy environment. You're already in the movie the moment you pass through the ticket booth. So it's not that Universal did it first. I think that Universal did it best because they made the clear connection between the guest coming to the park when the guests came to the park, they were given a promise that now they could ride and experience the movie that they'd seen.
If you look nowadays to the current situation between Disney and Universal, what do you think about the current battle between the two companies if you look at the park?
Well, I think it's always good to have a battle because it sharpens both sides. Each side gets better because they have to. They feel the pressure of competition. And I know, having been on the Disney side and since leaving Disney, working for others who have to remain nameless, that each side feels the pressure to want to do better. Because remember, it takes a lot of money to build a theme park ride. It takes a lot of effort to build a theme park ride, and you're going to spend a lot of time building the theme park ride. And at the end of the day, at the end of those 3, 4, 5 years, you want to be able to turn to yourself and your colleagues and your friends and your family and say, wow, we did the best, whatever that was, that's ever been done. You don't want to say, well, we did a great, mediocre job. You want to say we did a incredible job, fantastic job. And so competition leads to doing great things. And so therefore, I would say competition and conflict is a good thing, not a bad thing.
Like we always said before, without the Wizarding World of Harry Potter, we probably would never had Pandora or Galaxy's Edge or these strong things that keeps the industry growing and evolving. Like you mentioned, big theme park project takes between 3 and maybe 7 years. In an earlier interview, you mentioned that you have a very short attention span. But how do you keep interest and focus on a project that lasts 3 to maybe 7 years?
Because I narrow my focus to let that project become all-consuming. And if you don't believe me, you could ask my wife and son. But I start to really focus on the project. And again, let me say that there are 3 stages I find any project. The first stage is a blue sky project, and it's done with a very small team of a group of people, Imagineers or Universal Creative or another company. And that's where a group of people, a handful, sit in a room with paper and pencil and start to dream of what they want to do. The second phase, you grow your team because now you decide what you want to do. And you need a different group of people who can generate tender documents, engineering documents, civil documents, ride documents, lighting documents, and whatever documents are required to tender and award the new ride. The third important phase then is what I call the army phase. And that's when you now have awarded everything. You bought your ride, you bought your facility, you bought your plant material, your light bulbs, everything you've purchased, and now you need an army of construction workers to build this thing. And if you've done your job well in the phase 1 and 2, phase 3 goes very well. Although that's the phase where typically I would spend, we would work 24/7 weeks, 24-hour days. There'd be 3 shifts. For Rock and Roller Coaster, I would work first and third shift. I'd have second shift to sleep and eat. And you do that. And so that's what I mean by whether I choose or have it imposed. I keep my attention span focused because the work forces me to be focused.
Yeah, we go back to your first phase, the blue sky Imagineering. You're also well known for drawing fun maps. You have a sort of passion,
yes.
Not only Disney, but also Universal maps. If you could design a Universal ride, what would that look like? Which IP? Share some ideas with us.
We're really in the area of a non-disclosure agreement.
I can understand.
I can comment on doing fun maps, however. Yeah, well, I've done one for Universal Beijing, which I wanted to publish before they opened last year. I have almost finished one for Universal California or Universal Florida. And unfortunately, I had to set that aside due to other work project commitments. But I may end up, doing a set of Universal. And I say that only because Disneyland had a history of doing fun maps for their parks. And again, I'm a big collector of fun maps, among other things. But Universal really didn't do that. And you could find Universal maps on their guidebooks and other places, but they never really had a history of doing fun maps. So I did one for Universal Beijing. I've almost completed one for Universal Hollywood. And I'm willing to take votes from the audience on which one I should do next.
We will share a poll on our Twitter account and on our Instagram so people can vote which one you should do.
Okay, excellent. I look forward to that.
If you're looking at the theme park industry, like we said before, there's a battle between titans. But the great thing about that is that it also challenges other parties to step up their game. If you look, for instance, at the developments in the theme park industry outside of Disney and Universal, and mainly to European players like Efteling, Europa Park, PortAventura, and Phantasialand. How are you looking at the developments of these kind of parks? Is there anything you learned from that, or?
Well, I'm always learning, but to answer your question briefly, due to COVID, there was a lot of shutdown and delay on projects at Disney. But what has shocked me and surprised and pleased me is that the other participants in the theme park industry, the ones you mentioned, and I would also add to that the ones in China, such as Chimlong, Happy Valley, and others, these companies are continuing to grow. And the reason they continue to grow is they have faith in the entertainment industry, the themed entertainment industry. Because, I believe in my bones that people want to be entertained. And they want to go to pleasure parks. They want to see follies. That has been historically documented for over 200 years. I mean, originally roller coasters started in Europe, and now you have growth in China. You have growth in Universal with their amazing Epic Universe that is about to come out of the ground. And so these companies have given a vote of confidence that the theme park industry is a growth industry because there is a market for that. So I think that, things will get better. It won't look the same as before COVID, but I think that we will look back in probably 3 to 5 years and be amazed by, some incredible developments by the people you mentioned and the ones in China.
Yeah, you recently quit your career at Walt Disney Imagineering, and you're now into the consulting business. Can you share some projects you're working on right now?
Or is it all NDA?
Oh, yeah, it's all NDA. I mean, it's interesting because I had an NDA at Disney, of course. When you join, you sign. That was back in 1988. But the world has changed because the NDA at Disney was like a half a page, and before social media, it really didn't cover very much. But now today, companies who I can't talk about, send me things that look like telephone books to sign. And so, unfortunately, everything I'm doing, when it's announced, some things one project has already been hinted at strongly, although the company has not yet made an announcement. Others, I'm waiting for them to announce. But I'm working, and I've actually been busier now than I was the last year that I spent at Disney Imagineering. My home office studio is well established, and I'm busy.
If we look at, and we go back to Universal, because you mentioned you visited Universal parks, could you tell us maybe your top 3 Universal rides you've ever done? Without hesitation, which Universal rides are your top 3?
Oh, let's see. Ones that are there today or ones
Whatever
ever?
you like.
Whatever you like. It could be the ride from the past or the current.
I would tell you that my number 1 ride is Back to the Future.
Oh,
It's the original one.
Yeah, we've got we've got a lot of love for that ride.
It was amazing. And the one that I know, well, I was at the Universal Studios Park in Orlando when they built the building. The building was there when the park opened originally, but they had a countdown clock in front. And I loved that ride because the way guests it would subvert the normal way guests would load onto a ride. Typically, you have a long, continuous line for guests, and then they would be cut into individual groups to board the ride vehicle. Universal Back to the Future didn't do that. You had a continuous line, and then you were divided into the first pre-show room, the second pre-show room, and then finally 8 people boarded onto the DeLorean for the ride, which amazing concept of how they used and managed guest flow. I love that ride. The second ride I miss, and again not there anymore, is Jaws. Just because again it was ambitious and outrageous. Because hey, there's a dead shark on fire, and oh, there's a shark, coming out of the water. The Universal is not afraid of big scares, no. And I think that is to be applauded. Another ride, is probably going to be the tram tour here in California, in Hollywood. Again, because it was such an interesting mix of driving you through an actual theme park. Well, not a theme park, but a studio lot. And if you went on it pretty regularly, you'd find that your pathway or route would be changed depending upon the week or month that you travel, because you can't go down the road you went last trip because they're making a movie there.
It's constant changing.
It would be constantly changing. It was always dynamic. And it was amazing because of Hollywood, it's on a hill, so you could look out and see the entire Los Angeles basin. So it was very scenic in addition to being, I'm going to say, educational, because when you left the ride, you had an understanding of maybe what was involved in making your favorite movie or television show. So those are the top three.
It's a great classic top three.
Yeah, it's a great and Jaws. You can still ride Jaws at Universal Studios Japan. They still have the ride there. That's
Yes.
one positive note for this.
You know, and it's interesting because here's one Universal story I can talk about. It's the one that got away. When I was at Disney Imagineering, Dave Burkhardt, who was the head of Disney Worldwide Global Standards, he went to work for Universal Osaka as the creative lead for that project. And he called me and said, I'm starting this project. I'd like you to join me. And so I was faced with this offer, and Disney heard about it. And there was back and fro counter offers. And finally, I ended up staying at Universal, well, having to tell Dave Burkhardt, that I could not join him. But that's the one that got away, because if not for that, I would have been adding Universal Osaka to my credit list.
The Disney dollars win.
If you look at theme park design, is there a favorite ride system that you keep in mind when developing things or in your blue sky sessions? Is there a ride system that you always love to think about?
Well, usually, it's a three-part answer. I love roller coasters. I developed, I think, 5 coasters at Disney, such as the Casey Jr. powered coaster at Disneyland Paris, Rock and Roller Coaster, Gadget Go coaster, Crush's coaster at Disneyland Paris again, and others. So I love roller coasters, always looking for a way to do a roller coaster. The other ride system I love is whatever serves the story that I want to tell the best. So, if you want to tell a story, you may want to turn to an omnimover story system. I might want to turn to a free ride or trackless system. When I was working on developing Ratatouille for Disneyland Paris, the best way to tell that story was the trackless system. You could have done others, like an omnimover, but the best tool in my toolbox was the free range trackless ride system. So, I have a personal preference toward roller coasters, but at the end, the ride system comes out of the story that I want to tell.
If we go almost to the end of this interview, I would like to know if there are people listening and want to do the same job as you had. What sort of advice could you give them?
Well, first, be passionate. Really love what you're doing, because what you're going to do is going to take everything out of you. Second, find what area that you really like. If you go to a ride, what is the thing in a Disney or Universal ride that really attracts you? Is it the lighting? Is it the sound? Is it the structure? Is it the facility? Is it the ride system? Is it the movie? Well, then focus on becoming the expert in that area. And then make friends in the industry. Find people who are there. Attend shows. You have the advantage now of social media. So when you find a tweet or a post that you really like, reach out to that person. Most of the time, they'll be very grateful to hear your input, and be polite. Don't be a flame. Don't start a flame war. Don't be a troll. People who work on rides for 3 to 5 years, we have feelings too. So if you have a criticism, that's fair, but don't make an assumption about why we do what we do, and please don't be mean. You'll get a lot further in your chosen field if you're nice to us, but definitely reach out to people. When people reach out to me on Twitter or other social media platforms, I most of the time will respond. And, obviously when there's something I can't talk about, my answer is can't talk about it. But I always enjoy hearing from, fans of theme parks, because again, I was a fan of theme parks before I worked for a theme park company or work for a theme park company today. So I was a fan first, guys. just like yourself.
Yeah, we're big time fans. Big time fans. One thing I'm curious about, if like you said, sometimes you do things in your project that may go bad with the audience, or is there anything with the knowledge you have now that you would have changed to some of the projects you have done?
Yeah, I would say I worked as a designer on New Tomorrowland at Disneyland, California. And, I would have said to the project team leaders, we didn't have enough money. You weren't giving us enough money. You were raising expectations too high. It was being marketed to guests as a New Tomorrowland. And that carries with it expectations. So you want to match your budget investment target to your expectations. So that's my one regret, is not that I did not say at the time, hey, we need more money for what you want us to do.
Yeah, because maybe some of our listeners don't know, but that project overhaul, if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, that was the old Tomorrowland, the bright white Space Mountain. It got like a budget version of the Paris Tomorrowland Discoveryland, with a lot of bronzing on the buildings, the new how do you call it, the new rocket rods ride, which replaced the very popular People Mover system. Am I correct?
Yeah, you absolutely are. As you know from going there, Discoveryland in Paris is the Jules Verne version of the future, a possible future, the future that never was, but could have been. But those bronze tones that are applied in Paris are applied to metal, fiberglass, other smooth surfaces. Trying to apply those bronze tones to California, taking them to California, means you're applying them to plaster, which are a porous material that doesn't mean that when you want that plaster to look like metal, it will. It just looks like dirty plaster. Yeah. So it's disappointing to look at that. The second thing was Disneyland in California really reflects a retro or googie or even almost a art moderne sensitivity, because it was designed and opened in 1955. It was designed in 1952 by designers who were born and were familiar and in school in the 1930s and 40s. So their viewpoint was really to do that, the very googie future. And so again, I'm a big proponent, if they ever redo Tomorrowland in California, go back to the 1955 Tomorrowland and take it further to make it what it was, because that era is like the Jules Verne, a classic possible future, not a future that happened, but a future that could have happened, and it still resonates with guests. So I know that's a little long-winded, and I put a plug in for design, but there are reasons you should and should not do things. And in the case of California, the lesson learned was you can't paint earth tones on plaster and expect it to look like Paris.
No. So if your advice is, if you do something, don't do it cheap, do it good.
But exactly. But also, that doesn't mean you have to have an endless checkbook. When I worked on Toon Studios for Disneyland Paris, an estimator gave me the estimate. He said, this is your target investment. And he said, well, these are 2 rides that you could buy with that target investment. And I turned to them and said, well, do you mean I have to buy those 2 rides, or do I have to stay within the target investment? And his answer was, no, just stay within the target investment. I don't care what you build. Just don't go over budget. And so delivered, the Cars ride and Crush's Coaster, and they stayed within the budget. So my lesson or word of advice is, you don't have to have an infinite amount of money to deliver good design. You do need to know what it is that people expect you to deliver. You need to know what the schedule is. You need to know what the budget is. And then that's a box that you can work within. Or at least that's the box I work within.
Yeah, because for instance, the Crush Coaster, I think, is a good example of a very popular ride. But because of there's only one track, basically, the capacity is very low. Not a lot of people can ride it. If you look back, would you say then they should have built 2 of the same version? Or?
Well, yes. Again, there are lessons learned on all of these things. Let's go back to Universal's Back to the Future. They do sacrifice capacity because they do divide guest groups from one large group to smaller groups for the first pre-show to finally 8 in the pre-show before you board the vehicle, which means they have to monitor every room to make sure every room, when the doors open, the guests are primed to flow into the DeLorean ride vehicle. It would have been so much more efficient if you'd had one long line and then people individually boarded their DeLorean. That would have been more efficient. More efficiency leads to greater capacity. However, you balance the storytelling requirements against your capacity ideal. And in that case, Universal opted to tell this story in a better, more convincing and immersive way than be the most efficient that they could have been.
Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Where can our listeners connect with you online?
Well, they can always find me on Twitter at Jim Shull. And then I'm about to start a little sidebar project where I'm going to be starting a blog, or I've actually started a blog, because I know from Twitter and the reactions that there are some long form stories that I just can't tell on Twitter. And so I'm starting a blog, which will be linked to my Twitter account. And I invite readers to follow me over on the blog.
Yeah, and a personal question. I would also like to see you on Instagram.
I'd love to. I'm going to have to turn and get some information on how to do that.
I will teach you some.
Yeah, we will help you.
Okay, awesome. Guys, I take that as a promise.
Yeah, we will help you. It's no problem.
And the next time we're in California, we will drop by at your office for a coffee.
Perfect. An espresso, a beer, a coffee.
Or tea.
Yeah, or all of them.
Or all of them.
Zo, Nicky. Ik vond dit serieus wel een van de leukste shows, een van de leukste gesprekken die we hebben gehad.
Het leek bijna een Disney-podcast.
Ja, misschien moet onze naam veranderen in U-Tales.
Ja, nee, het was super gaaf om Jim te spreken natuurlijk.
Ja.
Hij heeft heel veel betekend. En vooral voor de park waar wij zijn opgegroeid natuurlijk. Disneyland Paris. Is toch wel een beetje wat bij mijn jeugd hoort.
Ja, absoluut. Maar ook als je ziet alle andere projecten waar hij aan heeft gewerkt. En toch wel leuk dat er ook toch wel wat Universal dingetjes in zaten.
Ja, we konden hier en daar wel wat nieuwe info krijgen.
Ja, ik vond het echt nogmaals superleuk.
Ga hem ook volgen, iedereen, op Twitter. Jim Shull. We zullen de link ook delen in onze show notes en natuurlijk op onze socials. Waar kunnen mensen onze socials eigenlijk vinden? Ja,
onze socials kun je vinden op alle sociale kanalen. En die vind je allemaal op @upperlotpodcast. En of dat nou Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube... Overal kun je ons vinden.
We're everywhere. Ja, en heb je ook een vraag voor ons, dan kan het altijd ook gemaild worden naar info@upperlotpodcast.nl. Dennis, ik spreek jou weer snel voor een nieuwe show.
Yes.